Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where AI pricing, compute scarcity, and enterprise reality all collide. For a while, AI felt like software. Buy a seat, hand people access, and assume the costs were somebody else's problem. Now the meter is visible, the bills are real, and a lot of confident AI strategy suddenly looks much less confident. The big structural change here is simple. OpenAI and Anthropic moved from seat-style software economics toward token-based API economics, with tokens becoming the core unit of revenue. The headline numbers are huge. The claim is that annual recurring revenue went from about $3 billion in early 2025 to roughly $30 billion for OpenAI and $47 billion for Anthropic by mid-2026. If those figures hold, they tell you something important. Growth is no longer mainly about selling access to a tool, it's about monetizing every unit of inference. And you can see the same pattern spreading. GitHub Copilot moved toward a more agentic, usage-charged model. Google's Gemini Ultra added usage limits and per-token charges. Anthropic started billing third-party tool usage per token too. That matters because seat pricing hid the true cost curve. Vendors were absorbing variability and smoothing it into a flat subscription. Token pricing pushes that volatility back onto customers. For casual users, that may be fine. For power users, it's a shock. The example here is stark. A personal context portfolio builder ran up a $5,000 bill in 6 weeks, compared with a $200 monthly Claude seat. That does not automatically mean token pricing is unfair. It may actually be more economically honest. If one workflow consumes vastly more compute than another, flat pricing can mean light users subsidize heavy users. But honesty is not the same thing as acceptability. Once customers can see the cost directly, they start changing behavior, capping experimentation, and asking whether the workflow is worth it at all. This is where the so-called token shortage becomes more than a pricing story. It's really a scarcity story about inference compute. The example used here is Uber exhausting its entire 2026 AI budget in 4 months. We should be careful with any single anecdote, because budget blowouts can reflect bad planning as much as true scarcity. Still, the underlying pattern is credible. When AI usage becomes easy to trigger and hard to govern, consumption can outpace budgeting very quickly. That creates enterprise sticker shock, and sticker shock changes priorities fast. Projects that sounded transformational under a flat cost assumption suddenly have to prove ROI under a metered one. This is also where a lot of hype runs into first principles. A model may be impressive, but if its inference cost is too high for the value it creates, enterprises will not scale it broadly. So scarcity doesn't just punish buyers, it reshapes the market. It rewards cheaper models, pushes vendors toward lower-cost token offerings, and gives products like Cursor's Composer 2.5 and Google's Gemini 3. Flash a clearer opening. In other words, the shortage is not only a constraint, it's also a forcing function for efficiency. One of the more revealing details is internal token maxing. Some organizations used leaderboards and consumption targets that encouraged employees to use more tokens. That sounds absurd on first pass, but the incentive logic is familiar. When management wants to signal that a new technology matters, people often end up measured on visible activity rather than actual business outcomes. And that is classic Goodhart's law. Once token consumption becomes the target, token consumption stops being a useful proxy for value. The waste here isn't just financial, it distorts learning. Teams start optimizing for bigger prompts, longer chains, and more experimental volume, even when none of that improves the work. So the correction organizations are now making is not merely budget discipline, it's governance discipline. What should count is reduced cycle time, better decisions, higher quality, or measurable revenue impact, not raw token burn. That point is better supported than the idea that more AI usage is inherently better. The evidence here clearly favors outcome-based metrics over input-based ones. The strongest constructive signal in this set of stories is the KPMG and UT Austin study of 1.4 million workplace AI interactions. Its main finding is that the highest impact users treat AI as a reasoning partner. They frame the problem, iterate, test options, and co-think, instead of treating the model like a vending machine for finished answers. That matters for two reasons. First, it suggests the performance gap is not just about model quality, it's about workflow quality. Second, it implies this can be taught. If collaborative reasoning habits are trainable at scale, then enterprise advantage may come less from who bought access first and more from who trained people to use it well. There's also a cost angle here. Reasoning partner workflows can reduce token waste if they focus usage on useful iteration instead of sprawling trial and error. That does not mean collaborative. Use is always cheaper in raw token terms. Sometimes deeper iteration could use more tokens. The stronger claim is narrower. Those tokens are more likely to map to real outcomes. And that's the distinction a lot of organizations missed. Efficiency is not the fewest tokens possible. It's the highest value work per token spent. If tokens are the economic unit, then compute is the upstream choke point, which helps explain the infrastructure arms race. The reported move here is that Elon Musk's XAI division began supplying compute capacity through Colossus 1 and 2 to Anthropic, with SpaceX framed as a kind of neo-cloud provider. The exact long-term implications are uncertain, but the strategic logic is clear enough. Companies controlling dense inference hardware gain leverage over token availability, token pricing, and who gets capacity when supply is tight. That helps explain why investors are increasingly excited by physical inference infrastructure. Not only model labs, valuations rising around inference providers suggest the market believes bottlenecks will persist. There's a trade-off hidden in that optimism. Infrastructure ownership can improve reliability and margins, but it can also concentrate power. If a smaller number of firms control access to compute, they gain outsized influence over the pace and cost of AI adoption. So this isn't just a hardware story, it's a market structure story. Policy is beginning to reflect the same reality. Policymakers appear to be treating AI growth not only as a software issue, but as an infrastructure and resource allocation issue. The proposals described here split in different directions. Data center moratoriums from AOC and Bernie Sanders on one side, and a token tax from Elizabeth Warren on the other. Those are very different tools. A moratorium tries to slow expansion directly, a tax tries to capture some economic value while allowing expansion to continue. Neither approach is costless. Moratoriums could constrain supply further and make scarcity worse. Taxes could raise prices or reduce deployment, depending on who ultimately absorbs the cost. The reported White House opposition to expanding Anthropic's Mythos access, partly because of token scarcity worries, is especially telling because it suggests the government is already making decisions with compute constraints in mind. What's still unclear is whether regulation will relieve pressure or intensify it. That depends on whether policymakers are targeting excess, scarcity, or concentration, because those are related problems, but not identical ones. The broadest takeaway is that AI stopped looking like ordinary SaaS and started behaving more like a metered industrial input. Once that happens, a lot of secondary effects follow naturally. Budgets tighten, incentives break, efficient models matter more, infrastructure owners gain leverage, and policymakers start paying attention. The weak version of the story is that customers simply hate usage billing. The stronger version is that token pricing exposed the real economics of inference, and now every part of the market has to adjust. That doesn't prove the token model is the final model. Vendors may still bundle, subsidize, tier, or hybridize pricing, but it does suggest the era of pretending compute is free inside a flat subscription is ending. That's it for this one. Thanks for listening to Podkey Slopcast. The pricing page is starting to matter as much as the demo, and that's worth watching closely. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.